The most expensive investment I ever made was not in a company, a building, or a stock. It was in a man that nobody else believed in. 4 years ago, I walked into a fashion show expecting to sign a partnership deal. Instead, I walked into a decision that would change the rest of my life. My name is Charlotte Hayes, and at 31, I was already carrying responsibilities most people spent decades trying to reach. Hayes Fashion Group had been part of my family for 3 generations. By the time I inherited control, people expected me to think like a machine, analyze risk, calculate returns, never let emotions interfere with business. Most days I succeeded. That night was different. The event was being held inside a converted warehouse overlooking the Hudson River. The space had been transformed into something extraordinary. Bright runway lights cut through the darkness. Cameras flashed. Music echoed through the massive room. Models moved across the runway wearing collections worth more than some people's annual salaries. Investors, celebrities, and industry executives filled the front rows. From the outside, everything looked glamorous. From the inside, I knew how fragile it all was. Fashion was built on appearances. One bad season could destroy a career. One bad headline could erase years of success. Halfway through the evening, my attention drifted away from the designs and settled on one of the male models. Lucas Bennett. At the time I barely knew his name. Yet something about him stood out immediately. It was not his appearance. Fashion shows were full of attractive people. It was the way he carried himself. Calm, focused, professional. While others chased attention, he seemed completely indifferent to it. After the show ended, I found myself thinking about him for reasons I could not explain. The next morning I discovered why. During a meeting with one of our talent agencies, his name appeared again. A contract dispute, sponsorship withdrawals, financial problems, industry politics. By the end of the conversation, everyone at the table had reached the same conclusion. Lucas Bennett's career was finished. They discussed him like an expired product. A failed investment. Someone no longer worth saving. I remember staring through the conference room windows toward Manhattan, while executives moved on to the next topic. Yet I could not stop thinking about the quiet confidence I had seen the night before. Something felt wrong. A week later, curiosity led me to request a private meeting. Lucas arrived exactly on time. He wore a simple dark jacket and carried himself with the same calm presence I remembered. The difference was in his eyes. Exhaustion lived there now. Not weakness. Determination. The kind that survives disappointment. We spoke for nearly an hour. About fashion, business, ambition, life. He never once asked me for help. Not even when I indirectly offered opportunities. If anything, he seemed uncomfortable discussing his situation. The more we talked, the more fascinated I became. Most people facing financial collapse would have spent the entire meeting trying to impress me. Lucas did the opposite. He protected his dignity at every turn. When the meeting ended, I made a decision that surprised everyone around me, including myself. 3 days later, I slid a document across a conference table and watched his expression change. $1 million. Enough to solve every immediate problem threatening his future. The room fell silent. Lucas looked from the contract to me and back again. Why? He asked quietly. It was a reasonable question. Maybe even the smartest question. I should have given him a business answer. A strategic answer. Instead, I told him the truth. Because everyone else sees what you are today, I said. I am interested in who you could become tomorrow. And in that moment, neither of us realized just how expensive those words would eventually become. Lucas stared at the contract for so long that I began to wonder whether he had stopped breathing. The conference room remained completely silent. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan moved through another busy afternoon. Yellow taxis filled the streets below. Sunlight reflected off glass towers. Life continued as usual while a decision worth $1 million sat between us. Finally, Lucas looked up. His expression was unreadable. You do not even know me. His voice was calm, but there was tension underneath it. Not really. Then why would you risk this much money? I folded my hands on the table. Because risk and value are not always the same thing. He almost smiled. Almost. Then he pushed the contract back toward me. No, for a second I thought I had misheard him. No. I cannot accept it. That answer was not part of the plan. Every advisor in my company had predicted gratitude, relief, excitement. Nobody had predicted refusal. You are turning down $1 million. I am. His gaze never wavered. Then explain something to me. I leaned back slightly. What exactly are you protecting? The question hung in the air between us. Lucas looked toward the city for a moment before answering. The only thing I still own. I understood immediately. Pride. Not arrogance. Not ego. Pride. The kind built from surviving difficult years without asking anyone to rescue you. For the first time since entering the room, I saw the full weight of everything he had been carrying. Lost contracts, industry rumors, financial pressure, public embarrassment. Yet somehow he was still sitting across from me refusing charity. The realization should have frustrated me. Instead, it made me respect him even more. Then let me change the structure. His eyes narrowed slightly. What do you mean? I pulled another document from my folder. Not a gift. He said nothing. An investment. That got his attention. I slid the revised papers toward him. The funds become part of a development agreement. You receive support to rebuild your career. In return, I receive a small percentage of future earnings for a limited period. Lucas studied the pages carefully. You prepared this already? I hoped you would force me to use it. For the first time, a genuine smile appeared. Small, brief, but real. Somehow it transformed his entire face. You expected me to refuse. I was counting on it. The room grew quieter. Something subtle shifted between us. We were no longer a wealthy executive and a struggling model. We were two stubborn people trying to protect different things. He was protecting his dignity. I was protecting my belief in him. Nearly 20 minutes passed while Lucas reviewed every detail. He asked questions, challenged clauses, negotiated terms. Most people in his position would have signed immediately. Lucas treated the agreement like a serious business partnership. Another reason I knew my instincts had been right. When he finally reached the final page, he set down the pen and looked directly at me. If I fail, you lose money. I know. A lot of money. I know. You are comfortable with that? I smiled. No successful investor is ever comfortable. A quiet laugh escaped him. Then he signed. Just like that, the decision became real. Yet what I remember most is not the signature. It was what happened afterward. Lucas stood and extended his hand across the table. I expected a formal handshake. Instead, his expression became unexpectedly serious. One day, he said, I am going to pay this back. The certainty in his voice surprised me. Lucas, you do not owe me anything. You are wrong. His eyes held mine steadily. People remember who believes in them when nobody else does. I watched him leave the conference room a few minutes later. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls. Sunlight illuminated the skyline. Somewhere deep inside, I felt the strange certainty that this would not be the last important promise Lucas Bennett ever made to me. The strange thing about promises is that you rarely recognize the important ones when you hear them. Life does not pause. Music does not swell. The world keeps moving as if nothing happened. Yet over the next several months, I found myself thinking about Lucas Bennett's promise far more often than I expected. At first, our relationship remained strictly professional. He attended meetings with agents. I introduced him to industry contacts. We reviewed business opportunities and branding strategies. Everything had boundaries. Everything had rules. At least that was the plan. Then reality arrived. Lucas worked harder than anyone I had ever met. He treated every opportunity like it might be his last. While other models spent evenings at parties, he spent them studying contracts, marketing reports, and business case studies. More than once, I arrived at the office before sunrise only to discover he had already been there for hours reviewing materials. One rainy Tuesday evening, I found him alone in a conference room surrounded by notebooks and financial projections. The city lights reflected across the windows behind him. Do you ever sleep? I asked. Lucas looked up from his papers and smiled. Occasionally. That is not a real answer. It is the only one I have. I sat across from him and glanced at the stack of documents. Most people would use this opportunity to rebuild their modeling career. His expression grew thoughtful. Maybe that is because most people think too small. The answer surprised me. What do you want, then? Lucas leaned back in his chair. For a moment, the confident model disappeared and something more ambitious emerged. Ownership, he said quietly. I do not want to spend my life helping other people build companies. His eyes met mine. I want to build one myself. The certainty in his voice sent a chill through me. Not because the goal sounded unrealistic, because he genuinely believed it. From that moment forward, something changed. Our meetings became longer. Conversations drifted beyond work. Sometimes we discussed business. Other times we debated books, technology, travel, or the future. Hours disappeared without either of us noticing. One evening after a product launch event, we found ourselves standing on a rooftop terrace overlooking Manhattan. The skyline stretched endlessly beneath the stars. Music drifted upward from the party below. Lucas rested his arms against the railing while looking across the city. Do you ever get tired? He asked suddenly. Of what? Being responsible for everyone. I laughed softly. That sounds suspiciously personal. Maybe it is. The wind moved through his hair as he continued watching the city. People see success and assume it makes everything easier. It does not. He smiled. You tell me. For a while neither of us spoke. The silence felt comfortable. Dangerous but comfortable. Then Lucas turned toward me. You know what the funny part is? What? His expression softened. You are the first person who looked at me and saw more than a job title. My heart betrayed me immediately, because the truth was that I had been seeing more than that from the very beginning. Before I could respond, Lucas looked back toward the skyline. The lights of Manhattan reflected in his eyes. One day, he said quietly, I am going to build something extraordinary. I smiled. I know. He nodded slowly. And when I do, I hope you are still there to see it. The problem with getting close to someone is that eventually they become part of your future. And when that happens, every dream starts carrying their face. For nearly a year, Lucas became part of my daily life. Not intentionally. Not dramatically. It happened through ordinary moments. Morning meetings. Late-night strategy sessions. Coffee cups left on conference tables. Conversations that stretched longer than either of us planned. Somewhere along the way, business stopped being the only reason I looked forward to seeing him. The dangerous part was that I never told him. I never intended to. Lucas had goals larger than either of us. Every month seemed to bring another opportunity. New partnerships. New contracts. New ideas. The career everyone predicted would collapse was now moving faster than anyone expected. One Friday evening we attended an industry event together. The ballroom overlooked Central Park. Crystal lights reflected from the ceiling. Investors filled the room. Executives exchanged business cards and promises. From the outside, it looked like every other networking event in Manhattan. Inside, it felt different. Lucas belonged there now. People listened when he spoke. They sought his opinion. They remembered his name. I watched from across the room while he discussed market trends with several company founders. Confidence surrounded him naturally. Not arrogance. Confidence. The kind that comes from earning every step forward. You are staring. The voice beside me belonged to my longtime friend Olivia Grant. I nearly spilled my drink. I am not staring. You absolutely are. She followed my gaze directly toward Lucas. That explains everything. I immediately regretted inviting her. There is nothing to explain. Olivia laughed. Charlotte, I have known you for 12 years. I remained silent. Unfortunately, silence is often an admission. Her smile softened. Have you told him? No, why not? The answer was simple. Because some risks feel larger than money, larger than business, larger than failure. If I lost $1 million, I could recover. If I lost Lucas, I was not sure I could. Before I could answer, the ballroom doors opened and a group of executives entered. Lucas glanced across the room. Our eyes met briefly. The familiar warmth appeared in his expression. Then someone interrupted him with another question. The moment passed. Later that evening, after most guests had left, Lucas and I found ourselves walking through the streets of Manhattan. The city glowed around us. Restaurants overflowed with laughter. Traffic moved through rivers of light. The air carried the first hint of autumn. "You have been quiet tonight," Lucas said. "I could say the same thing about you." He smiled. "Fair." We continued walking in comfortable silence. Then he stopped near the edge of the park. The skyline rose behind him. Reflections shimmered in the nearby fountain. For a moment he seemed unusually thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder what comes next?" he asked. "After success?" I considered the question. "Sometimes." Lucas looked toward the city. "Lately I think about it more." Something in his voice caught my attention. "Why?" He laughed softly. "Because ambition is easy when you are chasing something." His gaze remained fixed on the skyline. "The difficult part is deciding who you want standing beside you when you finally get there." My heart forgot how to behave. Every instinct told me not to read too much into those words. Yet hope is stubborn, especially when it has been growing quietly for a long time. Neither of us spoke again until we reached our cars. Before leaving, Lucas turned toward me one final time. "No matter what happens next," he said, "I want you to know something." The city noise seemed to disappear. "What?" His expression was calm. "Certain. Everything good happening in my life started the day you believed in me." 3 weeks later, Lucas disappeared. Not dramatically. Not the kind of disappearance that makes headlines. There were no rumors. No scandals. No warnings. One day he was sitting across from me in a conference room discussing expansion opportunities, and the next day his phone went straight to voicemail. First, I assumed he was traveling. Lucas often moved between cities for meetings and projects. Then a day became 3 days. 3 days became a week. The silence started feeling wrong. I called again. Nothing. I sent messages. No response. Even his assistants seemed surprised. Nobody knew where he was. Or at least nobody was willing to tell me. Manhattan had never felt larger. Every familiar street reminded me of him. Every cafe we had visited. Every conference room where we had argued about strategy. Every rooftop conversation beneath the city lights. I told myself I was overreacting. Yet the empty space he left behind kept growing. 2 weeks later, I stood inside my office overlooking Fifth Avenue while rain slid down the glass. The skyline appeared blurred and distant. My assistant entered carrying a small package. "This arrived for you this morning." I looked down. A simple envelope. No company logo. No return address. My heart immediately knew who had sent it. Lucas. Suddenly, the room felt very quiet. I waited until I was alone before opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter. The sight of his handwriting somehow hurt more than the silence itself. I sat down slowly and began reading. "Charlotte, if you are reading this, it means I left before finding the courage to explain everything face to face." The words blurred for a second before I forced myself to continue. "I am not leaving because I am ungrateful. I am leaving because I finally understand something important. Every opportunity one have today began because you believed in me. Every door that opened started with your faith. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was becoming comfortable standing in your shadow. That is not the future I want." I stopped reading and stared at the city outside. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows. My chest felt tight. I looked back down. The letter continued. "One day, I want to stand beside you as an equal. Not as someone you rescued. Not as someone you invested in. I need to discover whether I can build something that belongs entirely to me. If I fail, at least the failure will be mine. If I succeed, I hope you will understand why I had to try." My eyes moved more slowly now. Every sentence felt heavier than the last. "Thank you for seeing value in me before anyone else did. Thank you for every conversation, every lesson, every chance. Most importantly, thank you for believing in a future I could not yet see." I folded the letter carefully after reaching the final line. There was no promise of return. No timeline. No explanation of where he was going. Only one sentence written separately at the bottom of the page. "Wait for me to earn my place beside you." I read those words 3 times. Then 4. Then 5. Outside, Manhattan continued moving beneath the rain. Inside, I finally understood something terrifying. Lucas Bennett had become far more important to me than I had ever admitted. And now the man I could not stop thinking about was gone. 4 years is a long time to wait for someone. Long enough for seasons to change. Long enough for cities to reinvent themselves. Long enough to convince yourself that certain chapters of your life are over. At least that was what I kept telling myself. The first year after Lucas left was the hardest. The second became easier. By the third, I had learned how to carry the memory without letting it control me. By the fourth, I almost believed I had moved on. Almost. Hayes Fashion Group continued expanding. New partnerships emerged. New markets opened. My calendar became so full that entire months disappeared without warning. On paper, everything looked successful. Yet every now and then, I would find myself rereading the letter he left behind. The paper had softened from use. The ink had faded slightly. But the final sentence remained as powerful as the day I first read it. Wait for me to earn my place beside you. Then one Tuesday morning, everything changed. I was attending a global business conference in Manhattan. Thousands of executives filled the convention center. Technology companies, investment firms, retail giants. Every major industry seemed represented. My assistant handed me the event schedule while we walked through the lobby. The keynote speaker starts in 15 minutes, she said. I barely looked at the program. Conferences were usually predictable. Market forecasts, growth projections. The same conversations repeated with different presentations. We entered the main auditorium moments before the keynote began. The room was enormous. Bright stage lights illuminated a massive screen. Rows of executives filled every seat. Conversations echoed throughout the space. Then the lights dimmed. The audience grew quiet. A video introduction began playing across the screen. Awards, headlines, company milestones, billion-dollar valuations, industry recognition. The speaker's name appeared in large letters across the stage. Lucas Bennett. My heart stopped. For one impossible second, I thought I had imagined it. Then he walked onto the stage. The entire auditorium rose to its feet. Applause thundered through the room. Cameras flashed. Executives who rarely stood for anyone were standing for him. Lucas paused beneath the spotlight and thanked the audience. He looked older, sharper, more confident. The determined young man who once studied business plans in empty conference rooms had become something extraordinary. Founder and chief executive officer of one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the country. I could barely breathe. 4 years. 4 years without seeing him. 4 years without hearing his voice. And now he stood at the center of the business world, while hundreds of leaders listened to every word. His presentation was brilliant, clear, focused, visionary. The audience hung on every sentence. Yet I absorbed almost none of it, because I was too busy staring at the man who had vanished from my life, and somehow fulfilled every promise he ever made. Then it happened. Near the end of his presentation, Lucas looked out across the audience. His gaze moved through hundreds of faces. Then it stopped. On me. The room disappeared. The applause disappeared. Time itself seemed to hesitate. 4 years vanished in a single heartbeat. Lucas did not smile. He did not react visibly. Most people would never have noticed anything. But I knew him. And in that brief moment I saw recognition. Relief. Something deeper. Then the presentation ended. The audience erupted into applause once again. People rushed toward the stage. Investors. Reporters. Executives. Everyone wanted his attention. I remained frozen in my seat. Because after 4 years of silence, Lucas Bennett had finally come back. Seeing someone after 4 years is a strange experience. Your memories insist they are the same person, but reality immediately proves otherwise. I remained seated long after the auditorium began emptying. Executives rushed toward the stage. Journalists gathered near the exits. Conversations filled the air. Yet all I could focus on was Lucas. 4 years ago, he had been a determined young man with ambitious dreams. Today, entire industries paid attention when he spoke. The difference was impossible to ignore. Eventually, I forced myself to stand. Leaving seemed like the smartest option. Safe. Predictable. Unfortunately, life has a habit of ignoring carefully constructed plans. I had barely reached the lobby when I heard my name. Charlotte. My steps stopped instantly. The voice was deeper than I remembered. More confident. yet unmistakably his. Slowly I turned around. Lucas stood several feet away. For a moment neither of us moved. The busy convention center seemed to fade into the background. For years of silence suddenly occupied the space between us. "Hello, Lucas." It was the only thing I could think of saying. A smile appeared. Small. Genuine. Familiar. "Hello, Charlotte." Somehow that made everything harder. We stared at each other for another second before both laughing softly at the awkwardness of it. "I had a better speech prepared," Lucas admitted. "For 4 years." Something like that. His honesty caught me off guard. Just like it always had. We eventually moved toward a quieter lounge overlooking the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Manhattan beneath the afternoon sun. The skyline looked exactly the same as the day he left. I was the one who felt different. "You disappeared," I said finally. Lucas nodded. "I know. You could have called." "I wanted to." The answer came immediately. "Then why did you not?" He looked out the window before responding. "Because if I called, I would have come back." The simplicity of the answer stole every prepared response I had. Silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable silence. Heavy silence. The kind filled with things neither person knows how to say. "You built something extraordinary," I said eventually. Lucas smiled faintly. "I told you I would." "You did." For a moment pride replaced everything else. Because despite the hurt, despite the years apart, I had never stopped believing in him. Lucas leaned back in his chair. "Do you know what the strangest part was?" "What?" "Every major milestone felt incomplete." I frowned slightly. "That does not make sense." "It did to me." His gaze met mine. Steady. Unwavering. Every funding round. Every expansion. Every success. He paused briefly. "You were supposed to be there." My heart immediately became a problem. For years had not changed that. Then a group of executives entered the lounge. The atmosphere shifted instantly. They greeted Lucas with obvious admiration. One of them began discussing acquisition opportunities worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Another referenced international expansion plans. I watched the conversation unfold quietly. The power dynamic had completely changed. 4 years ago, Lucas was the person fighting for a chance. Now he was the person everyone wanted. The person companies competed to impress. Yet despite all of it, his attention kept returning to me. Finally, after the executives left, Lucas stood and walked toward the windows. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass. "Charlotte," he said softly, "I left because I wanted to become a man capable of standing beside you." He turned toward me. Confidence remained in his posture, but something vulnerable appeared in his eyes. The problem is that somewhere along the way, I realized I was never trying to build a company. My pulse accelerated. "What were you trying to build?" A slow smile appeared. "A future worth offering you." For several seconds I forgot how to respond. The city stretched beyond the windows. Afternoon sunlight reflected across steel and glass. Somewhere below, millions of people continued living their lives completely unaware that mine had just changed. "A future worth offering me?" I repeated quietly. Lucas nodded. There was no hesitation in his expression. No uncertainty. For years ago, he had left searching for something. Standing in front of me now, it was obvious he had found it. "You invested in me when nobody else would," he said. At first, I thought success would be enough to repay that debt. I immediately shook my head. "You never owed me a debt." A faint smile appeared. "I know that now." He walked closer to the windows and looked out across Manhattan. The problem was that I kept measuring success incorrectly. His voice softened. Every goal I achieved led to another goal. Every milestone created a larger one. He laughed quietly. Eventually, I realized I was chasing something that had nothing to do with money. My heart was already ahead of the conversation. The dangerous part was that I wanted to hear every word anyway. "What were you chasing?" Lucas turned toward me. "The right to come back." Silence filled the room. Not because I did not have an answer. Because I had too many. For 4 years I had imagined this reunion countless times. Anger. Accusations. Questions. None of those emotions were winning. Instead, I felt something far more complicated. Relief. You could have come back sooner, I said. I know. You could have called. I know. You could have told me where you were. His expression became thoughtful. Would that have helped? The question caught me off guard. After a moment, I realized the answer was no. Hearing updates about his life would only have made me miss him more. Lucas seemed to reach the same conclusion. Charlotte, every year I wanted to contact you. His gaze held mine steadily. But every year I asked myself the same question. What question? If I walked back into your life tomorrow, what would I be bringing with me? I frowned slightly. Yourself would have been enough. The words escaped before I could stop them. Lucas became very still. So did I. The truth hung openly between us. 4 years late. Perfectly timed. Neither of us looked away. Then something unexpected happened. Lucas smiled. Not the confident smile from magazine covers or business conferences. A genuine smile. The kind I had not seen since those early days in empty conference rooms. That is what I was hoping you would say. My pulse immediately became unreliable. Outside the lounge, executives continued moving through the convention center.
Phones rang.
Conversations echoed. Yet inside that room, everything felt strangely quiet. There is something else you should know, Lucas said. He reached into his briefcase and removed a slim black folder. I recognized it immediately. My breath caught. It was impossible. The original investment agreement. The same documents I had signed 4 years earlier. The edges were worn from time. Lucas carefully placed the folder on the table between us. I carried this everywhere. I stared at him. Why? His answer came without hesitation. Because every important decision I made started there. Slowly, he opened the folder. Attached beside the original contract was a second document. New, recent, formal. My eyes moved across the page. Then my heart nearly stopped. Because this document was not about business. It was about a future. And for the first time in 4 years, Lucas Bennett was finally ready to ask for one. For a moment, I could not read the document. The words existed on the page, but my heart was moving too fast to process them. Lucas remained standing across from me, calm on the surface, though I could see the tension he was trying to hide. 4 years ago, he had walked away with nothing except determination and a promise. Now he stood before me as one of the most successful young executives in the country. Yet somehow he looked more nervous than he had during any business presentation I had ever seen. Slowly, I lowered the folder and looked at him. Lucas. His name barely emerged above a whisper. He smiled faintly. I know. Outside the windows, Manhattan shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Inside the lounge, everything felt suspended between the past and the future. I spent 4 years trying to build something worthy of your faith, he said quietly. At first, I thought success was the goal. His eyes held mine steadily. Then I realized success was only transportation. It was never the destination. I felt tears threatening to appear. Lucas. He shook his head gently. Please let me finish. The room became silent. When I left, I thought I needed to become your equal. A small laugh escaped him. It turns out you never cared about any of that. I smiled through the emotion gathering in my chest. Because he was finally understanding what I had known all along. You believed in me when I was nobody, he continued. You saw potential before there was proof. You invested in a future that did not exist yet. He glanced toward the original agreement resting inside the folder. No investor should ever make a decision that irrational. Good thing I was never thinking like an investor. The answer made him laugh. A real laugh. The kind I had missed for years. Then he reached into the folder and carefully removed something wrapped in protective glass. My breath caught immediately. It was the original $1 million check. Preserved inside a custom frame. Beneath it was a small engraved plaque. The date, the amount, and a single sentence. The day someone believed before the world did. My vision blurred. You kept it? I asked. Every day. His voice softened. Whenever things became difficult, I looked at it and remembered what faith feels like. The city disappeared. The conference disappeared. There was only Lucas. The same man who once sat across from me refusing charity because his dignity mattered more than money. The same man who vanished because he wanted to build something of his own. The same man who had somehow found his way back. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. My heart immediately knew what was happening. "Charlotte Hayes," he said. "You changed my life long before I understood how much." His expression remained steady, but his eyes revealed everything. Gratitude, respect, love. "You invested in my future." He opened a small box. "Let me spend the rest of my life investing in ours." Tears escaped. Before I could stop them, for several seconds words refused to cooperate. Then I laughed softly through the emotion. "You know," I said. "For someone who spent 4 years preparing, that was surprisingly unfair." Lucas smiled. "Is that a yes?" I looked at the framed check. The years. The promises. The journey that began with belief and ended with certainty. Then I looked back at him. Yes. The answer felt effortless. Immediate. Right. Outside, Manhattan continued moving beneath the afternoon sun. Inside, the future finally arrived. And the most extraordinary return on investment was never the money. It was discovering that the person you believed in had spent years becoming the person who would never stop believing in you.